they've got an explosive playmaker at wide receiver there, Tyreek Hill, who finished wide receiver 32 last year, 58 receptions, 89 targets, roughly a 16% target share, 860 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Guys, your thoughts around Tyreek Hill?
So when we did our receiver rankings, we were a little all over the board with this one in terms of how we had it. I have Tyreek Hill finishing as the third best wide receiver. Kevin, you were a little less bullish on him, and Derek, you had him 14. Kevin, you had him at 7. So I think Tyreek Hill is poised to have a pretty big season. Now, this was obviously was before, while we were doing this, this was predicated on somewhat of a preseason and the ability that we thought that this offense was going to remain mostly intact as the season would go on. So I still think that Tyreek Hill is wide receiver 1 territory. I think that he will provide you enough of a spark. You know how we talk about you want a piece of a certain team's passing game or a certain team's run game or just a certain team's offense. You just want a piece of that. If you can get that piece, and that piece happens to be Tyreek Hill, you'll have to tell me where his ADP is. But I think that Tyreek Hill is a pretty solid choice if you can get him there. Back half of the first, top of the second, basically. That to me is an okay piece to start building with.
My biggest problem with Tyreek is to draft Tyreek. You are saying that this is my wide receiver 1. And while he will most likely finish in top 10 territory, my biggest problem with Tyreek at times is through all the 60% passing that Kansas City does, Patrick Mahomes does a great job of spreading it out. And ultimately, in that offense, it's going to run through Travis Kelce first. And then you start looking at Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman and Sammy Watkins and Denard Robinson. And so there's a lot of mouths to feed in Kansas City, which is okay when you're throwing the ball 60% of the time. But Tyreek splashed on the field in 2018, right? Because he just had big play after big play after big play. The problem was there's not a lot of receptions that come with those big plays. So it is very boom. You have a decently safe floor with Tyreek, but 5 catches for 73 yards and a half a touchdown a game, on average, something like that. I feel like if I'm picking a wide receiver to be my wide receiver 1 in, whether it's the back half of the first, front half of the second, something like that, I'd rather go a different way. I'd rather have Julio Jones that has a little bit safer floor, but the production's there, yardage and receptions wise. That makes up for that gap in maybe a lack of touchdowns at times, but he's seeing the volume week over week over week because Matt Ryan, that is his favorite target, and that is his go-to no matter what.
And I had him ranked the lowest of the three of us, sitting down there at wide receiver 14, so just outside of wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 territory. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, Kevin, you already touched on it, that he's not the first option in that passing game for Patrick Mahomes. It is Travis Kelce. And Tyreek's a guy that can take the top off of defense, that can have explosive plays. But he had a ton of weeks last year where he finished in wide receiver 3 or worse territory. There was only 4 weeks looking at it that he was wide receiver 1 territory. And that is not a guy that I want as my first wide receiver on my team in an ADP where I'm typically drafting my second running back before I'm looking at my first wide receiver. So he's kind of a pass for me on his ADP. He's a terrific player, explosive guy that can give you a lot of boom, but just ADP for me, I'm out on him.